Welcome to the Depth Dive. Today, we're diving straight into some pretty dramatic assertions,
Mhm.
assertions about the Chinese government's influence on media here in the U.S. We'll be looking specifically at, well, Hollywood and news organizations.
And our source for this is an audio recording. It's titled Emergency Alert Communist Chinese, Now Taking Over US Media.mp3.
Right. So our goal today is really just to unpack the arguments being made in that recording, understand the concerns it's raising.
And the source itself sets a certain tone, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Saying truth is becoming stranger than fiction.
It certainly does. It jumps right in, alleging the Chinese president went to Davos, the Davos Forum,
And supposedly called for China to lead a new world government.
with the specific aim, according to the recording, of hindering U.S. recovery and then President Trump.
Yeah, and there's more. The source also claims China is, actively advising U.S. mainstream media.
Advising them on censoring the independent press.
That's the claim.
Hmm.
It paints this picture of a very proactive, deliberate effort.
Okay, so let's start with Hollywood. What are the key claims there? What's the source saying about the film industry?
Well, the main accusation is pretty significant. It's that the Chinese government isn't just, influencing things subtly.
How?
No, it's actively buying up major Hollywood studios, getting directly involved in actually producing movies.
And the recording is an example, a really striking one.
It does. The claim is that movies are being produced or were planned that show President Trump as, well, a dictator.
Someone who needs to be overthrown.
Exactly. That's the gist of it.
And how does the source provide context for this? Is this presented as something new?
It's framed within a longer trend, actually. The argument in the recording is that, look, over the last decade or so, China's been increasingly controlling how its own films get made.
Editing them for the Communist Party line, that sort of thing?
Precisely. Making sure they're palatable. So the recording suggests there's already a precedent set within China's own film industry.
The source also mentioned a specific movie remake, didn't it? Red Dawn.
Yes, it did. The relevance there, according to the recording, is that the Chinese government allegedly demanded changes.
Changes to the film.
Yeah, they supposedly insisted that references to China be removed before it could be released. It's presented as an earlier, maybe less direct example of exerting influence on Western content.
Okay, so that's the background. But the source claims things have escalated recently.
Dramatically, yes. The recording asserts that just in recent months, Chinese-backed billionaires have actually acquired controlling interests
Controlling interests?
in the major 6 production studios. That's a huge claim. It suggests real ownership, not just influence.
And the source connects this alleged control to, well, to a specific view of Hollywood's output already.
Right. The argument goes something like this. Hollywood has supposedly been, and these are the source's words, very anti-family, very anti-gun, very anti-American for a long time.
And the Chinese control allegedly makes this worse.
That's the assertion, that this perceived trend will only intensify under this supposed new control structure.
The language used in the recording sounds quite intense.
Oh, definitely. It talks about a clear and present danger to the very sovereignty of our country. Very urgent, very alarming language.
You mentioned a specific film example earlier, the one supposedly depicting Trump as a dictator. Can you give us a bit more detail on that from the source?
Sure. The recording claims there's a specific high-budget film, potentially linked to Michael Bay, though that's part of the claim.
Okay.
And this film's entire premise is President Trump as this dictatorial villain. It's used as the prime example of the kind of content allegedly being pushed.
And the plot, the recording mentioned plot points.
It did. Pretty detailed ones, actually.
Yeah.
The supposed storyline involves a U.S. soldier.
A soldier?
Yes, hired by, the source calls him a loving communist Chinese billionaire to rescue his family from a now tyrannical U.S.
Wow. And lead an uprising.
And lead an uprising against Little America, as the film supposedly calls it. That's the narrative presented in the recording.
That's quite something. How does the source react to this alleged plot?
Very strongly. Calls it treason. It directly asks, how can a country survive if foreign powers take over its media, its theaters?
So it frames it as an existential threat.
Absolutely. The recording explicitly calls it an information warfare coup.
And who's behind it, according to the source?
The communist Chinese with their globalist and liberal cohorts. That's the specific phrasing used, placing it firmly within a particular worldview.
Okay. Let's shift gears slightly. What about the news media? Does the recording make similar claims there?
It does, very similar. It alleges the Chinese government is also pouring money, tens of billions of dollars, is the figure mentioned, into buying up controlling interests in U.S. news media outlets.
And the source compares this to domestic monopoly concerns.
Exactly. It draws that parallel, suggesting foreign control poses a similar, perhaps even greater danger than domestic consolidation.
And there was also a claim about interviews with the Chinese president.
Yes. The recording alleges that major U.S. newspapers interviewed the Chinese president.
Okay. And during these interviews,
He supposedly lectured them, told them that pro-Trump media was fake news and that, well, it should be shut down. That's the claim.
the source then contrasts this with previous accusations, right, about Russia.
It does. It draws a sharp contrast between these alleged public actions by China and the earlier accusations of covert Russian interference aimed at helping Trump.
So the source is pointing out what it sees as a kind of hypocrisy or double standard.
Essentially, yes, saying China is openly doing what others were accused of doing secretly.
So given all these serious allegations, what does the source suggest should be done? What's the call to action?
Well, first, it directly calls on then President Trump
To do what?
to call out communist China and Hollywood explicitly. The recording says it's his duty to do so.
But the recording anticipates a counterargument, doesn't it, about free speech?
It does, yeah. It acknowledges that some might say, well, you can't criticize them. That would violate the Chinese government's free speech rights.
Which sounds a bit odd, maybe.
Well, the source certainly thinks so. It immediately counters by pointing out the lack of free speech within China.
Citing specific examples.
Yes, mentioning the persecution of Falun Gong Buddhists as a prime example of how China restricts expression for its own citizens. The implication is, why should they get free speech protections here if they deny it at home?
So instead of direct censorship, what approach does the source advocate for the U.S. government?
It suggests using the bully pulpit,
Meaning?
using the platform of the presidency, basically, to publicly expose what the source calls this tyranny, to raise awareness among the public.
And is there anything the public themselves should do, according to the recording?
Yes, there's a direct appeal. It calls for the American people to take action and boycott these Hollywood production houses.
The ones allegedly under Chinese influence.
Exactly. It's pushing for a consumer-led response.
The recording also offers a kind of backstory, doesn't it? How this situation supposedly came about.
It does. It claims these alleged takeovers were sort of allowed to happen during the Obama administration.
And for a specific purpose.
Yes, the stated purpose, according to the source, is to portray President Trump negatively and, more broadly, to discredit the whole idea of a free, open society in the U.S.
And the source connects this to other things happening in the media landscape.
Yeah, it tries to place it in a wider context. It brings up the now largely debunked accusations about Trump and others being Russian agents.
That's a contrast.
As a contrast, yes.
Yeah.
And it also points to other examples it sees as negative media portrayals of Trump,
Like what?
like a Washington Post piece
Hmm?
comparing him to Hitler over stock market gains, or Madonna allegedly calling for the White House to be blown up. These are presented as evidence of a pre-existing media bias that this alleged Chinese influence is now amplifying or exploiting.
It's interesting, though, because while the source paints China as this hugely powerful media manipulator, it also makes a claim about China's own internal stability.
That's right. Quite surprisingly, perhaps, the recording asserts that China itself is tottering on the edge of collapse.
Which seems contradictory. A country about to collapse is also taking over U.S. media.
It does seem like a contradiction, yes. The source presents both ideas: immense external influence and internal fragility.
And the recording kind of loops back at the end, doesn't it, to the global picture.
It does. It circles back to that Davos Forum claim, reiterating the assertion about the Chinese unelected president.
Promising globalists what?
Promising, allegedly, that he could bully America into submission and basically complete their vision for world government. It ties everything back to that initial global agenda narrative.
Okay, so let's just recap the core claims from this audio source. It's asserting that the Chinese government is actively buying control in Hollywood
Producing specific anti-Trump content,
and simultaneously acquiring controlling interests in U.S. news media.
using billions of dollars to do so, and all presented as part of this larger plan to undermine the U.S. and promote a globalist world order.
And we've heard the specific examples the source uses to back this up, that detailed movie plot.
The Red Dawn incident from the past.
And those alleged statements from the Davos Forum, these are the pillars of the argument presented in the recording.
Absolutely. And it's important to keep in mind, as we've noted, the very strong opinions and the urgent, almost alarmist tone used throughout the source material.
The language is definitely chosen to provoke a strong reaction.
Without a doubt.
Yeah.
So this deep dive into the recording, into these specific claims, leaves us with a final thought for you, our listeners.
Considering these assertions about foreign influence in media and the really strong feelings expressed about what that could mean for national narratives, what questions does this raise for you?
Yeah, what does it make you think about the relationship between, say, global power struggles, who owns the media, and this whole concept of national sovereignty, especially in the world we live in today? Something to mull over.